Aberdeen when I was 3.
See, I'm related to the reasons in Lego.
Right now.
Okay. And then from there, I went to college in California to play baseball, and that's where I met my wife. And by the time I was done playing there, I was actually offered a contract with the Yankees, but I wisely said, no, I want to go live on a farm in Saskatchewan. I was really tired of traveling to games. Let me tell you, that gets old. Sort of like, no.
What position?
I played third base. This was back in the 80s. I actually played on Team Canada a couple of years. So I had a fun time, but then when I came to the end of it, I realized the dream has changed.
Is there a lot of Canadian ball players?
I don't think so. There's a handful. Like when I was coming up, there was a handful. Why is that? Because mostly Canadian guys play hockey.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of like in the U.S. If you encounter a hockey player, it's probably what's that?
When you're 5 years old, you start.
Yeah. And we have a good culture of raising kids to play hockey right. That they have the same culture of raising guys to play baseball right from the start. So it was a fun time, but it was a good choice too. And my wife and I now live in Saskatoon. We sold the farm about 12 years ago. Lived out there for 26 years. Moved to the city. I live across the street. And
From here?
yes, across the street from this church, in that little court.
Oh, okay.
Maybe sometimes you park there. Feel free to park at my house. I won't be upset.
Careful how many people you say that to.
Yeah. Well, it's Sunday morning, so all's there. So, I will get started here as soon as Stuart returns with coffee. Apparently,
I thought you just have to go out the door for that.
I thought so.
on a new plot.
Oh, easy. I thought he was going to do one of those little Keurig things.
Yeah, he's got a decaf, I guess.
Oh, and you don't have a decaf. Oh, I was too specific in my thing. But I do want to sleep tonight. I do. You look awfully familiar. Have I met you before at some other event or just here?
Well, I haven't heard you here yet.
Okay.
The weeks that you've been here, I haven't been here.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Oh, my goodness.
It's something familiar.
You know what that means?
Church circles.
Oh, okay, yeah.
For years, so
That's
my
right.
name is Warren Romancia.
Warren Romancia. Welcome, Warren. Chocolates to first-timers. And
I can't eat chocolate, so
okay,
I'm allergic to it.
I haven't got any other thing to offer you. I'm sorry. Mark, you look newish.
I'm Jewish.
You are. Okay.
It's Christmas, I guess, kind of thing.
Okay. Have you been here on my previous talks?
No.
I didn't think so. Yeah. Josiah, unfortunately, has been, so he gets no chocolate.
And I don't say anything intelligent, so.
That's right. He's no chocolate. I am. Yeah.
We're in the same boat.
Join the club.
You notice that there's some handouts there. These things are very
So
interesting.
is the Crown of Thorns, that was in the Notre Dame Cathedral? Is that the real deal, or is there any...
Didn't know there was one.
Yeah, they're saying it's the Crown of Thorns that Jesus had.
Wow. So, whoa. I did not know that.
That
I
just,
had the same reaction. I saw the news and I'm like, okay, is that the real crowd? I know I'm young.
Did they
That's
save
their-
it?
that's their claim. Yeah,
Did they save it from the fire?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, let's just say I don't know. This is the first I've heard of it. I'm going to investigate it for sure. Because, you know, here's the thing about these things. Yeah, well, Vatican is full of stuff. They have preserved some amazing things, and they just do it 1 year at a time. Like, oh, well, that's it over there. And it just, here we are now, and wow.
Just some guard made up the thorny thing and just probably in 5 minutes and checked it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it, because if it in fact is the actual crown, then it would correspond to the marks on the shroud. It would. So then that could be, and if there's some DNA to be lifted and something like that. Wow, you went to a lot of trouble, Stuart. Thank you. So good. All right, so Stuart says Willie's going to pray for me.
Willie, why don't you open up and go and lay hands on this man and pray for him? And have God supercharge us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Forgive me, I'm an amateur to pray.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Lord, for bringing Ken to us to shed some more light on the subjects that he has, and bless us that we hear what he has to say and comprehend the things that we should. And thank you for everyone that was able to come, and bless our fellowship. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Willie. Okay, so for those of you who haven't heard me talk previously, I like to start out by saying that Christianity is a reasonable faith. And what I mean by that is that it's not made up and it makes sense. And you might think, so what? But those two things right there make Christianity unique among religions. And worldviews, for that matter. Christianity is the most eminently reasonable explanation of the reality that we live every day. And a lot of people go, no, science and all this stuff. Yes, well, science actually is nicely contained inside of the Christian worldview. Science grew up in the fertile soil of Christian thought. I could talk about that a while, but tonight, being that it's Easter time, I want to get right into this, and I want to talk to you about the minimal facts argument. And this is a thing that you would find very helpful if you were talking to someone who thought, well, Christianity sounds okay to me, but the resurrection, oh my goodness, that's too big of a deal for me to get over. I don't think I can believe that. I believe there was a Jesus, and I believe he did stuff, but I don't think he was risen from the dead. I have a lot of friends who are in that category. This is a great line of reasoning to use with them. This is a great line of reasoning to use with people who are educated, who know history, and who are possibly skeptical of the Bible. Maybe you know some. Maybe you have a family member. I've got a couple of family members who are very skeptical of the New Testament. This is a very good thing for them. I like to remind them of it at Easter time so that they would just consider again what it is that they actually do believe. Now you're going to see something here that is so simple, and you're going to walk away with the ability to talk about it. This is a really cool thing because it has you'll just get it and you'll go, oh, I understand how this works. It's called the minimal facts argument for this reason. Here we go. In all four Gospels, Christ's death and resurrection are described in detail. And there are at least 10 historical facts about these events that historians are in agreement with. And we take the gospel accounts to be true because they correspond with the facts that we know about history. And I want you just to pause there and think about that. We don't take the gospel accounts to be true because they're in the Bible. The Bible says. No, we take them to be true because we know that they are coherent. These are the tests for truth that we talked about in the last talk. And that means they make sense. They correspond with reality. There really was a Jesus. There really is a city of Jerusalem. There really is a place called Bethlehem and Judea and all of these places. This is real. So we take the gospel counts to be true because they correspond with history. And they make sense. And the gospel works. Okay. Here are the 10 facts that I'm referring to. Every historian that you will meet who has studied the first century knows that there were a few significant events that happened in Israel. One of them was the life of Christ, and the other was the destruction of the temple by the Romans. Those are the two things that happened. And they know that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate between 30 and 33. And we're confident about those dates for several reasons. They know that his body was placed in a tomb. Jesus' death caused the disciples to despair and lose hope. The tomb of Jesus was found empty. The disciples came to believe that Jesus was risen from the dead. They'll grant you that because they're not actually saying that the resurrection happened. They'll just say they came to believe it. It's a historical fact. They'll go on to say that this belief transformed them to the point where they were willing to die for it. Further to this, James and Jude, the brothers of Jesus, converted from Judaism to Christianity. James actually became the head of the church in Jerusalem and was martyred around 62 AD. And Paul, the greatest persecutor of the church, converted from Judaism and became the greatest missionary in history. He was executed by the Romans for his faith in the city of Rome in about 65. Okay, these things, if you put these things on the board, nobody's going to say, oh, that's a bunch of made up stuff. Anyone who's educated knows that these things happen. They also know that following that, the Romans under Titus sieged the city, killed about 1 million people, destroyed the temple, and took all the wealth over to Rome, and under Nero built the Colosseum from all the wealth that they collected. And if you go to Rome, don't leave without getting a picture of yourself beside the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus is just across the way from the Constantine's big arch of, what is that? Who's been to Rome?
Years ago.
Okay, yeah, the Romans always built arches when something fantastic happens. When Constantine came out with the Edict of Toleration, of course, he built this gigantic arch, and it sits there right beside the Colosseum. Can't miss it. Right across the way, though, is the Arch of Titus. And Titus built that one, and on it he describes his conquest of the Jewish people. Okay, so history. Christianity is based on historical events. It's based primarily on one single event, the resurrection. And that is a claim that turns out to be easily defensible just by looking at the facts. Here's how it goes. If you want to deny the resurrection, then you will need to provide another version of events that can account for all of the facts. Do you understand how that works? If I'm going to give you an explanation of an event that is different from the one you've heard, I am going to have to satisfy you by taking into account all of the facts in the story. If I only explain 2 of the facts that you know to be true, but the rest are like meh and definitely not, then you know my story is not true. Simple. It's very simple. Now, here's the thing. So far, the only explanation that can account for all the facts is that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. And this is the challenge that I put out to anyone and everyone. If you want to become famous and never have to work another day in your life, just come up with a theory that's plausible, that accounts for those 10 facts, but doesn't include Jesus rising from the dead. That's all you have to do. It seems like a very simple thing to do. Right? So, what are some of the theories that have been offered to explain these events? We're going to look at some of them today. We're going to look at the best ones only because the others really aren't worth looking at. We're going to look at the stolen body conspiracy, the swoon theory, the hallucination theory, the myth legend, the spiritual resurrection, and the Jesus twin theory. These are all ideas that have been put forward to try to explain the minimal facts. Let's look at the stolen body conspiracy. I have this as number 1 because it has been put forward in conjunction with other theories, and it appears on its face to be the most plausible. So let's look at it. The disciples stole the body while the guards were distracted and then lied about it. This theory was first put forward by who? You probably know.
The Jews, high priest.
Exactly. This was the first attempt to explain the empty tomb. This was it. And it worked really well for about a month. Yeah. And then the wheels came off, really, because then you had Pentecost, and then you had all this nonsense, and everybody was converting, and it was like, oh, it's a hot mess. So this theory did really well for the first little while, but then became a ruined mess. Why? Well, it explains the first 4 facts. Jesus died. He was put in a tomb. The tomb was found empty. The disciples were discouraged. But after that, it doesn't work. Because the disciples actually believed that he was risen. You had a question.
I heard there was more than 3 guards there. I heard there was like 30. One story I heard, it was around 30.
Right. There is
Protecting the tomb.
Right. That is possible because the Jewish leaders thought it was a big enough deal to ask Pilate to put a guard there, and so
if it was like 30, then for sure at least one person would be awake all night.
Right. And just knowing what we know about Romans and the way they held their soldiers to a very high standard of performance. This was a way to save the lives of the soldiers who were there, who ran. Right? And the Jews said, look, it's not a big deal. We'll tell the people this. Okay? Well, the problem started later on when things like James and Jude convert to Christianity. All of a sudden you've got Jesus' brothers who were devout Jews and skeptics of their big brother. They didn't think that he was the real deal. But all of a sudden you've got James saying, my brother was the Son of God, and I know that to be true because he came to me personally. What? Oh my goodness. You have a rumor like that going around. And then all of a sudden, the bold acts of the disciples, the way they came out and were just like, do whatever you want to me. I have met the risen Christ. When Paul converted, that was really the end. Because Paul was one of the people who were fighting to put down this this whole thing. So Paul converts. So you can't, now this idea of the stolen body just evaporates. And you got to think about the irony here too, because you've got a group of 12 guys, or 11 now at the end, and they have seen their leader killed, and they're huddling in fear, and one of them says, you know what we ought to do? We just ought to stick it to these guys and steal the body. Let's go in there, steal the body, and then say he resurrected, because that's what he said he would do. And then maybe one guy in the back goes, but didn't Jesus say don't lie and steal? Shut up! We're doing it! So, yes, let's honor our leader who said never lie and steal by lying and stealing. Now, it just doesn't wash. This whole thing is just dead. Moving on. The swoon theory. You've heard of it and you think, well, that's really lame. Well, let's just look at it. This is the idea that Jesus didn't die on the cross. It only appeared that he did, and he later revived in the tomb. Okay, well, that would, of course, explain how Jesus was seen alive again after the crucifixion. But it fails to account for these facts, right? Number one fact, Jesus was in fact executed, and everyone in attendance knew this. Okay, crucified people don't survive. Roman soldiers would just not have allowed that to happen. These guys were killers. They enjoyed it. It's what they did. Everyone saw the spear go in. They saw the water mixed with blood come out. They knew, oh, that guy's dead. It doesn't account for the transformed lives of the disciples either. I mean, can you imagine? Jesus revives in the tomb. Oh, that was a wicked poke in the side. But the guard goes away, and Jesus manages to push the rock to the side. Oh, and then the disciples meet sick Jesus. Jesus, you look terrible. Lay down. I'm going to get you some help here. What happened? Oh, that was terrible. This is not an inspirational story. I am not. And then can you imagine? James and Jude convert to Christianity. No. James would have met Jesus and gone, you stupid idiot, you almost got killed. Stupid. Told you. Jeepers. Sick of this. Right? Isn't that what you would say to your stupid older brother who just wouldn't give up? Get over it. No, he converts. So does Jude.
I was just going to talk about Jesus being crucified, that when the soldiers went to go break Jesus' knees, was because I remember reading there was a special Passover, and they didn't want to leave again up there, so they would have to take him down. That's why they broke all knees, because it basically caused them to suffocate to death. But Jesus was already dead, which fulfilled prophecy that it was to be the Son of God.
Yeah, isn't that remarkable? That is a remarkable prophecy in itself. He's absolutely right. The special Sabbath was the next day, and the Jews said, could we please have these bodies down because they'll make us unclean? And the Romans go, I don't know about you crazy people, but if you want them dead, here we go, get the hammer. Bam! Break the knees on the one guy. Well, he's almost by the time you get to the other guy, that guy's already dead. He is suffocated that fast.
Yeah, that was a common practice to smash their feet while they thought they were dead. Just see if
see if you get any kind of
and
reaction
Mary
to it.
said, no, this is one story I heard.
Mm-hmm.
You don't smash his feet or his legs while he's hanging.
Yeah.
So the guard grabbed his sword and cured him.
Yeah.
But normally it was to smash the bones in their feet to see if they were still alive.
Yeah.
That's one story I heard.
Yeah. So the prophecy is comes true that he is he dies in this particular way, but none of his bones are broken. Well, everyone else in the party had their bones broken. And again, the final thing, Paul, the enemy of the church, converted as well. It's interesting how in the minimal facts argument, Paul becomes such a key piece. There is no historian in the world who will argue that Paul wasn't a real person and that he didn't write 27 books of the New Testament. The historians will grant that, even if they would argue with you about the authorship of the Gospels and all that stuff, but they'll never argue with you about Paul, because Paul is almost impossible to argue against. You would have to come up with an explanation of where all his writing came from. Anyway, let's move on to the hallucination theory. The hallucination theory says that the disciples saw hallucinations that they took to be the resurrected Christ. And a lot of people think that this is how they became inspired, right? Because this theory would explain how they could become confident believers. But of course, you can't just tell part of the story. You have to explain all of the facts. It fails to take into account that the tomb was actually found empty. And we know it was found empty because the Jews made up a story about why it was empty. Right? They wouldn't have done that if it wasn't empty. You don't bother to do that. So obviously the tomb was empty, or the Jews would not have put that forward. And they wouldn't have it in their writings to this day that the disciples did a terrible thing by stealing the body, and that's why the tomb was empty. Of course, you've got James and Jude. These guys are problems. And Paul. Those three guys are a huge problem to anyone who wants to deny the resurrection. Also, the thing about hallucinations is they're individual misperceptions of reality. If we all came out of this meeting tonight saying that we'd seen something and it was the same something, we'd know one thing, and that it wasn't a hallucination. Right? It would have been something else. We may have been tricked in some other way. So this theory doesn't work for those reasons. Okay, the myth-legend theory. Now it's down the list of ways, and you'll see why, but it is actually the most popular. This is the one I get all the time. The idea that Jesus was not who we think he was invented by the church fathers hundreds of years later, right? Because Rome was coming to power and they needed a religion, so they fabricated all this stuff and they made it all up. It may have been loosely based on a person, but none of the events of his life are based on fact. Okay, well, this explains how we came to think of Jesus as the Messiah, right? Because we've been duped by the Catholic Church, and that's what they wanted. They wanted power over us, and so this is the greatest conspiracy of all time. And you're duped by it.
We were.
Yeah, we were. Not anymore. Okay, but here's the funny thing, it doesn't take into account even one of the minimal facts. So I would suggest that it is actually the worst. I'm going to say, if you have any respect for history, that's the one version that you can't use on me. If you're going to say, yes, I'm an educated person and I respect history, don't talk to me about this. That's nonsense. Okay, the spiritual resurrection theory. as you can tell, we're getting near the bottom of the barrel here. The disciples experienced the resurrection as a spiritual event. You've had a spiritual experience, haven't you? Probably all of you have. That's what they had too. But it wasn't a bodily return of Jesus from the grave. Okay, this theory has very little explanatory power. It just essentially denies the resurrection took place. That's all it does. It fails to account for the empty tomb, and the only facts it corresponds with are the crucifixion and the entombment. That's it.
Is this a JW idea? I don't remember. There's a group of people that...
Right. That is a good question. Easy to find out if you Google it.
Right.
The JWs and the Mormons have a similar view of Jesus, but I don't think they have to deny the resurrection to get there.
Okay.
Was the tomb built for just a temporary thing for anyone that died?
No. The tomb was built by Joseph of Arimathea. He was a rich man. And
it wasn't being used yet.
he had that carved for himself. Yeah, that was his. And he went, you know what? I respect this man so much. Here's the thing about those two characters that we know from history. We know that there was a small following. There was a small group of Jesus followers in the Sanhedrin. And they did not like the way their ruling body did the trial and were always picking on Jesus, and they really were upset by it to the point where when Jesus was crucified, these two guys came up and asked the Romans for the body. How do you think they were greeted the next day at Passover? Good day. No! They were like, that was it for them. They were out. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were done being Pharisees after that day. You could not recover from that. And shortly after that, of course, when the tomb went empty, they would have been very hopeful and they would have converted. They would have been part of the first church. Kind of exciting. We will definitely meet these characters when we pass from this place. Great courage to stand up in front of all of your friends and go, I will take that body, sir.
God speaking to him, obviously.
Yep. And he knew this was a travesty of justice, and that's the point that he was making. This was a travesty of justice, and I will put this man in my own tomb. I'll carve myself another one. So, we are down to the Jesus twin theory. And now we've really hit the bottom of the barrel and we're scraping the paint. This one was put forward, and if you want to find the original YouTube of it where it was introduced for the first time in a debate in Southern California somewhere, you can actually see how the crowd reacted to that when the guy came out with this. He was pretty much dead in the water right from the get-go because the crowd just roared with laughter when he came out with this. But it needs to be mentioned because some people are onto this. Okay. Well, here's the thing about it. The major strength of this theory is that it would make a good comedy. And you can just imagine how this idea goes, right? Jesus' twin, living in a different part of the country, hears about the events, comes back later, says, I am the resurrected Jesus. People go, oh, no. Yeah, come look. Here I am. Really a bizarre idea. Really bizarre. It completely departs from the facts, and I guess if you've ever seen Monty Python's Life of Brian, it has more in common with that story than it does with the actual events of history.
It's funny the first time you watch it, and then after that it's stupid.
Yeah, that's kind of where all Monty Python movies are. So, where does this leave us? Well, we can see that all of these theories can explain some of the facts, but that's not what you have to do. If I'm going to tell you that George Washington wasn't the first president of the United States, I'm going to have to account for a whole list of events that people accept as true, and I'm going to have to give you an alternate explanation for all of them.
There was actually 2 presidents before him.
There we go.
Can I have a candy?
Yes.
And you would have played.
You get a green ball.
They don't think I'm telling the truth.
Right.
He was a slave merchant too.
That's true. But, you know, what if I told you, you know what? He wasn't even a person. He's complete fabrication. Just like Christopher Columbus. He wasn't on that boat. It was a different guy. It was a different guy named Christopher.
Really?
Yeah, it was twin. So the strength of the minimal facts argument is that you don't have to know an awful lot. You just have to sit down and ask, okay, the burden of proof is on you. If you don't think the resurrection happened, I would like you just to explain how all of these things took place in the first century. And if someone can do that in a satisfactory way, immediately phone Ellen DeGeneres and his career will be launched. He will be on that show tomorrow and he will never have to work another day in his life. He will just go around telling this story.
Or he'll die of a heart attack a day later or something.
Anyway, let's wrap this up. I'm just going to say that as more and more information is uncovered about the first century, the best explanation of the facts remains clear. Jesus actually rose from the dead. Wow. It's just that simple. Now, the grave clothes. This is a different topic altogether. We're going to start with the Shroud of Turin. I passed out a little thing. You can take a look at that right now.
There's a bunch of copies on the table. Should be enough. Go around.
When I first saw the Shroud of Turin, I was interested, but then I heard that it had been carbon dated to the 12th century, and I went, stupid Catholics. You know, and I just blew it off, and I was just like, oh, what are they doing? This is so lame. Just put it away. But then, about 20 years later, this was like in the 90s, I get an email from a friend, and it has a link in it, and he says, you've got to see this. And I click on it, and I started watching, and I was going like, I've been wrong about this the whole time. Now, I'm just going to go through and tell you a bit about the Shroud. I don't know where you're at with the Shroud, but let's just take a look at, we're going to start off with the history of the Shroud. A lot of people don't know this, on the early history of the Shroud. The Shroud is a linen cloth woven in a 3/1 herringbone pattern measuring 3 by 3'7". This correlates to the ancient scale of 2 cubits by 8 cubits. And of course it matches loom technology because it is an actual ancient piece of fabric. Such a cloth would be very expensive. Yeah. And Joseph of Arimathea was a very rich man. Okay, sometime after the 1st century, the Shroud came to reside in southern Turkey and was referred to as the image of Edessa, and nobody knows that. Everybody thinks that it just showed up in the 14th century and, well, there it was. But no, it's got a long history prior to this event as the image of Edessa. You may want to check that out. There's a nice Wikipedia page about it. There's the little town of Edessa. You can see, that's just in southern Turkey, and you can see Damascus over here, down this corner. So you get some reference of where this is. If you want to see a bigger, that's an ancient map. You've got all these ancient names there. Here's a modern map. And the map that you just saw was that region right there. And of course, Edessa in the middle. Okay. After Edessa, it was moved to Constantinople in 944 with much fanfare, including a sermon by the archdeacon which describes it in detail, and the Vatican has provided us with that sermon, and you can read that online if you like. You can search for that sermon that he gave. After that, pilgrims reported that it could be seen every Friday at the church of Blachernay. And what they would do is every Friday night, after the sun went down, people would gather in this church. It's not very big. And at the front of the room, they had the shroud sitting in a box, and they had a slat that it was laying over, and they would raise it up and hang it up, and there were candles. It was lit from behind. And so the image would be more striking. Because it's a very faint image, as you can tell, you can barely see it. So they would illuminate it from the back, and then people would look at it, they'd have prayers and what have you, and then they'd put it back in the box, and they'd do it again next Friday. Yeah, it was very interesting. So they did this for 300 years until Constantinople was sacked in 1204, and so they moved it. The shroud later appeared in Liry, France, and was often on display, and this is when it actually became a controversy, because then there were some letters circulating around, people saying, that's not the real shroud of Christ. And some people tried to pour cold water on the whole idea because they were jealous of the guy who had it. It's an interesting story. You can read about it. Anyway, in 1532, there was a fire in the chapel of Chambéry, France, where the shroud was being kept. Now, part of the metal storage case melted and fell on the cloth, leaving burns. And you can see those burns. Those are the dark spots. So you can see the way the shroud was folded in three parts. Right? Do you see how that was folded? And those corners would have been exposed to that melting, that hot metal, and they burnt the cloth badly, but they didn't actually harm the image much at all.
Like smoke damage, and it maybe enhanced it?
No, there was no smoke damage, but there was water damage. So what you see there is now, it has been since repaired, but those scorch marks are what you see. So in 1534, 2 years later, nuns attached a support cloth to the back of the shroud, and that support cloth now has a name too. I forgot what it is, but it's a thing. And they attached a 4-inch strip used to wrap the body, and they attached it at the top. And you can see there's a little line. Flip it. The shroud is actually flipped over there. So in this picture, that little line is at the bottom. Now that little strip there was ripped off the shroud when Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus put the body in it.
And is this the head right up top here?
You can see the head in the middle.
Is there the head down here?
The head is in the middle. Take a look at
In the middle?
Yeah, take a look at the head. So you have the face and the back of the head.
Right below the of.
Yeah. So I'm just going to finish the history of the shroud, then I'm going to show you some details about it. In 1578, the shroud moved to Turin, where it is to this day. So it's been there for nearly 500 years. And the next major thing that happens 400 years later, Secundo Pia photographed the shroud for the first time, and his pictures shocked the world. Now, why did they shock the world? Because people knew of the shroud and they were aware of it. And they'd seen it. They knew what it looked like. Well, the reason why Secunda Pia's pictures shocked the world is because it was the first time the shroud had been photographed. And that's what the negative looked like. When he was in the developing room, he was going like, ah! Because he realized what I have in front of me is a photo. The shroud is actually a photo negative. And what I'm looking at is the positive image. Yeah. So that's what he saw, and it rightly freaked him out. As he's dipping it in his chemicals there, that's what greeted him. So everyone's at that point going like, what is this thing? 100 years later, the STIRP team, Shroud of Turin Research Project, is given access, and maybe you remember this. The Catholic Church gives access to a group of scientists for like a few days, like a few continuous days, and they go in there and they work 24/7 for a period of time, and they just like do all kinds of tests to it. And then the Catholic Church says, "Okay, we'll take that back down. Thank you very much." But during that time, they did so many tests on that shroud, and we're still being flooded by the data they collected at that time. In 1981, they came out with their final report, and here's what they said. We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved. So they didn't want to come out and say anything particular. So that's what they said. But if you just research what has happened to all of those guys who were on the team, it's very fascinating how this event changed their lives. Most of them went to this research as skeptics, but they all came away thinking it was the real deal. Interestingly enough, the guy who conducted the carbon dating experiment, he later encountered someone who said, I think you made a mistake and here's why. I think you have a contaminated sample. And he was very defensive about his work that he had done. But he investigated their theory and he found out they were absolutely right. He had a contaminated piece of cloth. He had been allowed to take cloth from the edge of the shroud where it had been repaired. So he had a piece of some ancient cloth and some 500-year-old cloth, and of course it yielded an age of about...
Was it made out of hemp?
Linen. It was made of linen. So that would be flax.
Oh, yeah.
Flax fiber. So, it's a very interesting thing. Now, let's talk about the image on the shroud itself. The image is a precise photo negative on a non-photographic material. Let that sink in. There is no paint, dye, vapors, or scorching. The image is restricted to the uppermost part of the fibrils, and if you go online and you watch some of these things about the way they're analyzing it, they'll put these fibrils under the microscope and they'll go, there's the image, and it just...
I don't know what fibrils means.
Well, a fibril is when you look at the linen under a microscope, you realize that it's there's like hundreds of little fibrils that compose an actual strand, and the image rests on the very surface.
Was it common practice to wrap a body exactly the same way every time?
Okay, I'll talk about that. Why don't I talk about that right now?
But it looks like they had an extra long,
Uh-huh.
and then they put the head in the middle and put over top the head,
Mhm.
and then just wrapped it like this.
Yeah. I brought this to kind of give you an idea. When Jesus' body was placed in here, the head went there. First of all, they found out that they threw down flowers under his body. A bouquet of flowers was thrown down onto the shroud, and then the body was laid on there, and then they covered it up like this. Now they had previously torn off a strip. They had torn off a strip down the side, so they had a thin strip. So when the body was in there, then they just took this strip and wrapped it around. Done. So it was tightly wrapped around the body, and that's how he was laying in the tomb. So you're right, that's how it was done. Let's go back to talking about the image. The blood imprints precede the formation of the image. Think about that. Of course they would. Because if this is an actual photographic remnant of an event of the body of Christ being resurrected in a burst of energy, and his body going into a different dimension, and literally leaving the cloth, then of course the blood stains would precede the image. The image itself is only on one side of the shroud, of course, because there was only one side that was contacting the body. Right? There's no image on the back. Here's another thing. Pollen on the shroud is consistent with the plants native to Israel, and particularly the plant crown of thorns. The pollen is concentrated, if you look at the picture, the pollen is concentrated in the region of the head. Now think of all of the things, if you were, like people who believe that this is a forgery, a medieval forgery, have got to believe in some super powered person who could see, well, I've got to get all of these things in the right order to do this. How about this? Shadows of the plants, of the pollen that you find in there, shadows of these plants can be seen on the image of the back. So when they analyzed the image of the back, they took photographs of this, and one of the guys on the STIRP team noticed, I think I see a flower. What the heck? But of course, the flower didn't produce an image. It was only a shadow.
Was the back, did they lay on top of the flowers? Or
Yes. The flowers were laid on first, and the body was laid, the back was laying on flowers. Yeah. So of course, if the body goes into a higher dimension with a burst of energy, then the shadow of the flower would be left there. There would not be an image of the flower, right? Because the flower did not get resurrected.
It stayed, obviously.
Right. The flower stayed there and left a shadow.
Why do they call it a Turin? Turin.
Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is named after the city of Turin where it resides today. It's been residing in Turin for the last 500 years. So it used to be called the image of Edessa, because for nearly 1,000 years it was in the city of Edessa.
After someone's last name or something?
After the name of a city where it was residing. So it would almost be like...
But was the city named after someone's last name?
It's just a city in Italy,
Oh.
Turin is. Yeah. And Edessa is just a city in southern Turkey. Here's another thing. This one's a killer. Roman coins found over the eyes were minted by Pontius Pilate in 29 AD. Oh my goodness.
Cool.
That's nuts.
So they can see an image of a coin?
Yes.
Wow.
If you go on if you go online and you just start watching these things, you'll see that people have devoted their lives to researching this stuff, and you'll see all kinds of stuff. The data is still being analyzed. Here's another thing that they found out, that the 3D imaging of the shroud revealed bones, flesh, and bones. So it looks like an X-ray. It has depth. They didn't know what they would find, but there was something called a VP8 analyzer that they were playing around with in the early 80s because they were doing it was a precursor to satellite photography, right? And they had this special camera, and they would take pictures with it, and if they would analyze those pictures, they would get 3D representations. Well, they took the images of the shroud that they had taken, and they put them in the VP8 analyzer and went, well, what are we going to find? 3D images.
Do you think it took days to make the print, or do you think it took years for it to be the way it is now?
The shroud, I think, the image on the shroud was made in a microsecond. I think the events of the crucifixion happened very much like this. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, in a very hurried way, take the body off the cross, bring it to the tomb. There was some spices and stuff that they brought along. They set the body on the shroud. They flipped this thing over. They wrapped it up and then they rolled the stone and left.
So no doubt it was the blood that made the print.
No.
No, what was it?
I haven't got to that yet. But no, there is blood on the shroud, and I always thought that that's what the shroud was. I thought it was the bloody remains of a body and the imprint.
So there's blood on the shroud?
Oh yeah, there's blood on the shroud.
So they obviously know his blood type.
Yes, they did.
They do. 23 chromosomes or whatever.
Okay, here's what the experts think about the shroud. I'm just giving you a bit of an introduction to it. There's more here, but everyone knows there's no image like it in the world. And that's what I would expect. It would be kind of like God would say, you know what, those people 2,000 years after the event are going to be a real hard audience. They're going to be a real show me the picture kind of people.
Show me the proof.
Yeah, show me the picture. And I'll do it. I'll give them a picture. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, what's a material that's going to last and last? Well, linen. There we go. That's what it'll be on. You know, I'm making this up, of course. But I'm just imagining a conversation with him and the angels. And, we are sitting with this thing today. The church displays it once every 3 years.
Can you trust carbon dating?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
You can trust. Oh, carbon dating is a very, very solid
But
thing.
I was told that you can't trust it more than 100,000 years.
Yeah, it gets foggy after that.
Organic, trust it.
Yeah, I would say it gets foggy after that. But anything within the last 5,000 years, it's deadly
But
accurate.
it has to be organic, right?
Right. You can't do it to rocks.
No.
Okay. Here's what they think. They think that it was caused by rapid dehydration. And they have proposed that a similar image might be produced by an intense burst of vacuum UV radiation emitted simultaneously from every point in the body in the shroud, the equivalent to the output of about 14,000 excimer lasers. So there you go. That's how they think you might be able to fake it. Like that.
So
if you're
for
wondering
sure-
what an excimer laser is,
Yeah, that was done in 1000 AD, for sure they did that.
yes, they cobbled together what they had and bazamel. An excimer laser is the thing that a doctor will use in a medical procedure. Just so you know. But they think that a similar... Okay, so what could you imagine that would produce a sudden burst of energy like that? I'm gonna tell you that I think what you're looking at there is the photographic negative
Electrical.
is the photographic image of the moment of the resurrection. Right there. This is what you're seeing. You wanted a picture, you got one. Just take a look at it. You can see there's a definite front and back, the face, the hands. All of these things have been analyzed. The wounds on the back are consistent with a Roman flagrum. You can see that he was flogged from head to foot. And some of the flogging even came around to the front. That was a wicked thing.
Can they prove how tall this person was?
Oh yeah, they know exactly. They know exactly his weight, his height, everything. Yeah. Okay.
So it's more or less an X-ray then.
It's a very unusual thing. It's an image that's inexplicable. And this is kind of the way everything is when it comes to God. He doesn't just, like the Bible, for instance. The Bible's not just another book. If you look at it from a historical point of view and you look at the documentation, it is the book of books. There is no book like it. It's kind of like the Shroud. It's a one of a kind. That's kind of the way all things are when God does them. They're really done well. Have you ever heard of this? Who's heard of this? Candies for anyone who's heard of it. You're on the honor system. See, nobody. Nobody. Okay? Let's talk about the Sudarium of Oviedo. Where is the Sudarium of Oviedo first mentioned? I'll tell you where. In the Gospel of John, chapter 20. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. And he saw the strips of linen lying there, the shroud, as well as the cloth that it had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. What the heck is that? Well, here's the thing that we have found out, that when people were executed by crucifixion, it was a tradition of the Jews that when they died, when the person had actually died, family members were allowed to preserve the dignity of the dead. They were allowed to go and cover their heads. So when Jesus died, some family member, maybe John, I don't know, maybe would have requested, can I cover the head? They would have given him a ladder. He'd have gone up there. He would have taken a small piece of cloth. What turns out is he folded it this way, wrapped it around Jesus' head this way, then tied it in the back. And so Jesus' head was obscured from view, as a way to preserve the dignity of the dead. Now this thing sat on Jesus' face for a few hours. Body fluids were running out of it. And later when the Romans took the body off the cross, it looks to the experts like the Romans took him off the cross and he laid face down for about a half an hour on the ground, face down, with this thing on his head and lots of fluid drained out into this little cloth. Well, that little cloth, of course, when they take Jesus' body, the shroud, of course, would be folded nicely. They will walk to the tomb with Jesus' body and this thing on. They get there. They fold this out. on the slab of rock. They put Jesus' body on there. They take this thing off and they fold it up, set it over to the side, close that up, do the wrap. Jesus' body's laying there and they go, okay, go, good. We're going to go now. We'll take care of this. When Passover is done. It measures 33 by 21 and it does not have an image on it. Of course it doesn't, because it wasn't touching the body during the resurrection. All you have here is body fluids and blood. The blood on the shroud and the sudarium are the same. A-B. The wounds visible on the sudarium match the wounds of the man in the shroud. And you can see that on your picture, that you can see that there's, like, you can see a doubling of the stains, right? So just, you fold that thing was folded, and you can see how that other part was in the back of the head. When they analyzed the face on the shroud and those stain patterns, those stains match the facial structure. There's some great videos about that online. Facial structures evident from the stains are consistent with the shroud, and it has been kept separate from the shroud since it arrived in Spain in 711 AD. And the chain of custody on this little article is very well documented. They know who's had this right from day one, this cloth. That may... Just go ahead.
Sorry, so Jesus must have lost a lot of blood on the cross then.
He lost a lot of blood probably before he got there.
So he must have had hardly any blood in when they wrapped him up.
Right.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
So his blood loss was from his side, right?
Mm-hmm. And you can see the stain.
Whipping and stuff.
The blood loss was all from the head
Yeah.
and power forward, but it was also all the open wounds that he had suffered.
Yeah.
And then, and from the nails, so it was,
Yeah.
there was...
It was significant. Like he'd lost most of his blood. I didn't even mention that there's a wound visible on the side. When you look at the back of the shroud, you can see in how some body fluid puddled there.
So that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. So it's amazing the way if you look at these articles, you go, well, I'd expect to find this, and you go look and you go, oh, there it is. You go, well, I'd expect to see this. Well, there it is.
It's a lot better when you see the color rather than the print.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, look at that. You can see the wound mark, the nail mark in his wrist.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely see that.
So, by pointing on
And you can see that. Yeah.
where would you say his stab wound was on the picture?
Right in this back region right there, because there's some bleeding out there. There's a puddle of body fluid
So
there.
what are those darker marks on there?
Those darker marks are the burn from the fire in 1532.
Yeah, see, the spear was up into the ribs,
Yes.
and basically into the heart, where
Yeah.
there was fluid that was built up around the
Yes.
heart. As he's dying, when he's dying of crucifixion, your fluid basically starts to get built up around the face, around the lungs, and around the heart. So
That's true. And here's the thing. Do you think the gospel writers knew all this physiological stuff that we know now? That when you asphyxiate, your fluid collects in your pericardial, and if you poke this region, you wouldn't get blood. You'd get a lot of water, but a little bit of blood. But he observed when the spear went in, whoa, there was a gush of water and blood came out. Well, that's exactly what you'd expect from a crucifixion victim.
When he says, I'm thirsty, he would have been thirsty as he was dying.
Yes.
Which also, again, goes back to prophecy, where I think it's, I forget, I have to look it up, but there's the Psalm and Isaiah refers.
Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22.
Yes.
Psalm 22 is like, go home and read those two passages tonight. Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53. Psalm 22 was written 1000 BC. But it essentially describes from a first-person perspective what it's like to be crucified.
Isn't it a fact that when a body dies, all the muscles in the body, bones, skin, fluid, and then once the body dies, the muscles contract and all the urine and everything comes out.
Are you talking about rigor mortis?
Yeah.
Rigor mortis obviously was happened to the person in the shroud because of the position of the knees. You probably can't tell it from this picture, but if you go online, they know exactly what the body position was of the person in the shroud. Anyway, the conclusion on these two pieces of cloth are that they are forensically linked, and we are confident that they were on the same body. We know that because the puncture marks in the back of the head on the shroud match up with the blood stains on the siderium, on the facial structure and everything. So, what we have here, I'm going to suggest to you, is the burial cloths of Christ as described in John chapter 20. And the event of the resurrection probably, if you could imagine the resurrection happening, it would have been kind of like what we imagine like when people talk about the rapture. Boom! A very sudden burst of energy, and Jesus' body, what? Becomes multidimensional. It leaves the cloth. He doesn't get out of the cloth. He doesn't go, well, I'll just get myself out of here now. No, because when the disciples found the cloth, they were just laying there, like as if Jesus had poof disappeared out of them. And they were like, that's just weird. Here's another thing. People think that the angel rolled the stone away, and then Jesus went, thanks, it was very creepy in there. No, he was gone. Resurrection, gone. He's gone from that space. He went...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Why did they roll the rock back? What was the reason? Did someone say, I want proof or something? Or
No, the
why
reason...
did they move it? Because
Okay, here's the thing. When Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus leave, they close the rock. Right?
Sealed.
Yeah, it's sealed. The resurrection of Jesus happens, boom, and he's gone. He is no longer in the tomb. An angel comes down, stands there, and the guards go, holy crap, and they run, and the angel goes, and he moves the rock, and he stands there and goes, check that out. Nobody home. Ladies come. They go, oh, he's gone. Mary meets the angel. Peter goes, you're kidding me? He literally runs. And John running behind him. Oh. They have a foot race to the tomb. John describes it. They go in there and they go, no way, there's that. And there's that. And we saw that. We saw that. There they are. But he's gone. And they walk out like, what the fuck? Very shortly after that, Jesus appears to them in a room. They're all in a room going, they're in a room like us, doors closed, and they're going, whoa. Jesus appears to them. Ah! Jesus, how'd you do that? And he leaves in the same way. And from then on, it would appear that Jesus' body has the ability to go places quickly, and walls aren't an issue. That's just kind of what we can expect in the resurrection. I would say that involves more dimensionality and a lot of fun. Understatement. Yeah, so, I mean, what we're looking forward to is not just floating in heaven, disembodied spirits. Get rid of that idea. You are set for a body upgrade that is mind-blowing. Yeah. So, I'm not done here yet, quite. Take a look at this.
Oh my goodness.
Very interesting. You know that little girl that went to heaven and she drew Jesus? You ever seen that picture?
Akiana.
And they put that picture on this and it looks exactly like it. No, but he looks a little different.
When I first saw that, I fell down on my knees and I think I wept for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
As and here's something else. I did this presentation in Hepburn about half a year ago. And there was a young girl who came up to me 3 weeks ago and said, you know, when you did that presentation, I was in a very, very dark time in my life. And I called out to God in the dark of my bedroom the night before, let me see Jesus. I came to your thing the next day, and that's what I saw. She was like, that really had an impact on me.
You want to take a picture of that?
Sure. That is the face off the shroud. That's what that is.
Except for the eyes, right?
Did you get that from the internet, obviously?
Yeah, that's available.
Except for the eyes, right?
Right, because the eyes have coins over them. On the shroud, what you'll see is...
Why did they put the coins underneath?
To keep the lids down, I guess. I just think it's always been a tradition among humans just to drop
the Greeks do that.
The Greeks
Yeah,
did
the
that,
Greeks
yeah.
did that basically, like the 2 coins, but it's basically for...
Ride to the afterlife.
Yeah,
it
to
was
pay the
to
ferry.
the
Yeah.
afterlife, so that was-
Yeah. So it was a thing that was done. But the amazing thing is, yes, go ahead.
It's interesting though, because
A
if they put
Roman
the coins
coin,
on,
no doubt.
right? They put the coins on his eyes at the time. What did they say? 39 AD or whatever.
29.
29 AD.
They were
right,
minted in
sorry.
29.
29 AD, and I was just quickly looking. Right, there's in July 2018. You know, there's sort of a whole bunch of speculation that it was all medieval fake kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But there's nothing mentioned about the coins.
No. There's nothing mentioned
There's
about the
nothing-
coins. There's nothing mentioned about the flowers or the pollen or the fact that the image is not painted. It's not scorched. It's not anything. It's rapid dehydration. What's that?
Yeah.
Like it's a one-of-a-kind image. So there's never been another one made like it, and we don't know how it was made, but yet here we have it.
So much uniqueness to it.
So
It's like creation.
yeah,
Try and replicate, you know.
yeah. It's an artifact of human history that everyone has to come in touch with and see. And I think if you see this, it's very difficult to not join the dots and go, I need to worship that man, my Savior. I don't know how you could. You would have to, like, hey, I've done this presentation and people have gone, well, I'm not convinced. I'm going like, well, fine. I didn't do it to convince you. I just need you to know that this exists. This is part of the world you live in.
Being deceived.
So, yeah.
Blood type.
What was that?
Blood type. And you haven't asked enough questions. Just
Right,
saying.
the blood type was AB, right?
Oh. I was thinking about chromosomes. But they didn't get to analyze it.
I don't know that you can do an in-depth DNA
Okay.
analysis of. But I would expect that Jesus would have the same number of chromosomes that you and I would.
23.
I would think he'd have 46.
From his mother.
Yeah, I would think that he's got those from his mother. I don't, I've heard that there might be 23. You know what? If it turns out that he only had 23, I wouldn't surprise me. But I wouldn't hang my hat on the other either, because you could. I don't know what you.
Filled it in down 23.
I don't know what you can read into about the blood type AB. I'm sure that there's going to be something really significant, and I'm going to find out, and in 30 years I'll know.
Somebody knows.
Yeah, and I'm just telling you that.
Plus or minus.
Yeah, plus or minus a few. I'm going to say in 40 I'll know for sure.
What do you think the cross was? A small T or a big T?
Oh, dude, I think it was the way we picture it, with the parts sticking out, and on top of it would have been nailed the crimes committed, right? That's what they always did in the Roman times. So I nailed up the crimes committed.
That time the Romans were using that T shape.
Yeah. So I don't think we have any reason to think that it wasn't that. I think the message on the plate above his head is a very interesting thing too. If you just study that, it was written in 3 languages, and it was basically the crime. It was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, is what was written up there. Now that bothered the Pharisees. Remember, because they went, Don't. He said that, but... And Pilate was like, I'm just sticking it to you now. Because I don't like you. I think you guys are a bunch of idiots. You made me do something I didn't want to do. I wouldn't be surprised if Pilate converted. Because Pilate's wife was very upset by the whole thing. And Pilate, of course, he wouldn't have been oblivious to the fact that right in his little city, this whole Christianity emerged. Do you think he missed that? No. And that man who he looked in the eye, and he knew, that's an innocent guy, and I killed him. I think that, I'm not going to be surprised if I get to walk up and shake his hand. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. And he wrote on there, let me just tell you what I think was on that sign. Because in Hebrew, so the Greek goes this way, the Aramaic or the Hebrew goes that way. And in Hebrew it would be Yeshua, Ha-Nazaret, Wamelech, Ha-Yehuda. That is the way you would read that sign. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And if you would do the acrostic of the first letters, you would see the unpronounceable name of God, Vav He, and you would see YHWH.
Are you kidding? It was an acronym for
Yahweh.
God?
Yahweh.
It's an acronym for God?
Yeah.
What was written?
On his side, yeah, because if you do Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, then those first letters would be YHWH, Vav He, and
You just call me Yah?
And so yeah, that is the way that in the Scripture, in the Hebrew Scripture, that's how they symbolize the name of God, Yahweh. Right? And so I think Pilate was just super sticking it to them. He was going, there you go, Yahweh. You just killed your God. I think, I'm just speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit. Because what he wrote on there offended the Jews terribly. They were bugged. And you can piece it together. You just look at how would you write that in Hebrew? Well, that's the way you'd write it. And those are the letters that form that one line. It's kind of cool.
I kind of have a question for you. How many of you have been a pallbearer at a funeral? How many have been a pallbearer? So
Yes.
I just kind of been thinking here about what they would then carry Jesus, his body to that tomb and putting it in Rome in the shroud. What been going through their mind as the ones spending their time and getting to know him.
Yeah.
And what did they say? Well, what was their praying? What would they been thinking during this time? Especially seeing what he did on that cross, how much pain and suffering he went through, why he went there, how much dramatic that would have been just to carry the body.
Didn't two females first discover the body? Or
the empty tomb.
Weren't they the first in the tomb?
The ladies were the first to go to the tomb. I think there were 3. And
Mary?
Yeah, Mary and a group. But Mary Magdalene saw an angel.
Probably Gabriel, probably.
I don't know. Probably someone important. But here's the thing about Christianity, that once you start investigating the claims of Christianity, you find out that because it's true, everything you investigate, you find what you'd expect. Because it's not a made-up story. Okay? That's kind of the way everything goes. So this shroud is just an example of what you would find if you started investigating anything about Jesus. Anything. You would find what you'd expect. If he was the Son of God.
Why do you think we didn't know nothing before he was 30? Very little. Like once when he was 12. But how come? Did they hide him from us? Because he was so powerful? I mean, he was so...
I think he lived quite a normal life until he introduced... Like, he would have gone through Hebrew school, but he would have excelled in Hebrew school, right? Because at age 12, he was already standing with the teachers of the law and conversing with them, and they were like, wow, there's a brilliant young man.
Maybe he would stand out too much before his time, and so that's why they hid him?
I don't think anyone hid him. I think this was part of God's plan, that Jesus would grow up, and then at the moment of time when Jewish men would be recognized as significant, he would introduce his ministry and come out as a teacher, and he would, John the Baptist would introduce him.
But you know what I'm trying to get here.
Why there's a gap in biblical knowledge from age 12 to age 30. So this is an 18-year period where we don't know.
I think, things would probably frighten people from his powers that he had.
I don't know that he would have been doing anything unusual during that period of time, because the first miracle he performed was at the wedding in Cana. And it doesn't say, and people were used to Jesus doing this all the time because he was always like changing stones into bread and stuff like that. So everyone was like, what? So he emerges suddenly as a miracle worker. I'm sure that people would have thought, oh, Jesus is a brilliant young man, respected in the community. But then when he made the claim, when he stands up and reads the text of Isaiah in his home synagogue, people took offense.
But didn't Jesus always knew, right from probably a very small age,
Yeah.
what he was destined to do?
Yeah. I think that his humanity was the same as ours.
I think that's why he had that. He was human.
Yeah.
He had to live life like
He
that.
had to live a human life. Yeah.
To get to know
I
us.
heard that.
I think, Stu, you said it earlier, a couple of years ago, you mentioned that.
What's that?
A couple of years ago, you mentioned why he hid to a certain point. Well, why we didn't hear too much about him.
I don't remember that, but
There must be a reason.
I heard someone speculate that when he read the passage in Isaiah, because we can all read that same passage in front of the church and people won't get upset, right? But that he may have gone to sit on the Moses seat.
But then we don't hear a lot of other people either in the Bible.
What's that called? That seat of Moses is only meant for Moses or the Messiah, and it's in every synagogue today.
Interesting.
So that's speculation. So he just went. That makes sense to me that would infuriate people.
Also, he said today,
Oh yes.
the reading, this prophecy is fulfilled in your hearing. And they're going like, really? And it's interesting, if you look at the text that he read, he didn't finish reading the text. If you read the passage in Isaiah 61, he stopped mid-sentence.
Okay, let's read that.
Yeah.
Isaiah 61.
No,
Yeah.
53.
No, I think it was Isaiah 61. It's the one where he says, I have come to declare freedom of the captives.
Yeah.
And
The one
so
I'm thinking of is,
the suffering servant
no,
is Isaiah 53.
yes, but that's what is missing today in the Torah.
It's actually not missing.
It's not in their Torah.
Oh, it is. It is in their Torah.
Isaiah 53.
Oh, exactly. And they have a very interesting way of talking around it. I've heard this. I've heard this explanation of how they get around Isaiah 53. It's very made up.
So I was told in the synagogue in Jerusalem that it wasn't in there.
Oh no.
It's in there. I was in the synagogue not long ago. But here's what they do. They will read it, but then they go, we can't understand this. Now they go to the oral law, which is now the written law, which is the Talmud.
Oh.
The Talmud, they'll read from the Talmud. The Talmud is demonically inspired writings of interpretation.
Cover story.
Yeah.
Or story.
But I find that's the original cult, right?
Right. And if you go to Jerusalem, if you go on any tours, they'll take you to what's called the Shrine of the Book. And there the Dead Sea Scrolls are, and you'll stand in a room about this big, and all around you is the unrolled scroll of Isaiah. And of course I went, is Isaiah 53 there? And of course, there it is. But it's not. It's just a continuous writing, right?
Yeah.
It's not chapter 53. No. So it's just a continuous scroll, and when they found those texts, the rabbis went and hunted because they were like, is that in there? And it is. Then they were like, oh, that's kind of annoying.
Say that again. When the rabbis...
When the Dead Sea Scrolls were first being discovered, right?
Yes.
And when they put their hands on that Isaiah scroll, oh, the rabbis were very interested in, will that passage be in there? And they roll it out, boom, there it is. And they were going like, nuts.
They were thinking it was like...
They were thinking that Christians added it for sure. And they even had a story about how Christians added it.
Really?
I didn't
Yes.
know that. Fascinating.
Yeah, they had a story about how Christians added that. And so that was kind of a big moment in 1948 when that came out and they discovered the scroll and they were like, okay, what's in there? Fair.
Okay, can I go back
Yeah,
to
you
one thing?
read the
This
text.
Isaiah 61 passage. Where do we find out where he quit reading?
Oh, just go to the text in the New Testament where he reads.
Which is
Luke. I'll have that in a second.
Isaiah
4.
16.
Luke 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to keep going.
You tell me. Okay.
61.
So we stopped there to proclaim the year of the Lord's coming.
Verse 18. Yeah.
Luke
4.
Yeah, so Luke 4:18. Why don't you read the passage around it, like a few verses before and a few verses after.
So it starts, it's titled Jesus Rejected at Nazareth.
Yep.
Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread throughout the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Isn't it?
Somebody
Yeah.
handed that to him, showed beside it.
That's very interesting.
Say that again? I don't understand.
Someone
Like he didn't just pick up the scroll and scroll to it. Someone handed him the scroll of Isaiah.
Yeah.
And he
I'm
became...
rolling it. Oh, there. I'm
Yeah.
rolling it. He found the place where it was written.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and the recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Stop. To proclaim. So that's where he stops.
That's where he stops.
What does it say in
at the end is, and the day of vengeance of our God to comfort all who mourn.
So the wrath was not expressed.
That's right.
And that's key, because it was the new covenant.
That's right.
Coming, and the new covenant.
And he sits down, he says, today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. And they were like, are you saying that you're that guy who's come to send? And plus they're bothered because they're finished the sentence, because everybody knew that passage, and the year of vengeance, he didn't say that. He just stopped and he went, this section right here is fulfilled in your hearing. Not the next part.
So why do Jews, you think Jews would read that or believe it? I mean, back then and today, I mean, they're totally denying Jesus, even today.
Yeah, a lot of them do. Here's the thing that's unique to our time in history, because there is so much information available. Jews are converting by the thousands to Christianity. There, in fact, there is a website that I subscribe to. It's a YouTube channel called One for Israel, and it is nothing but Jews giving their testimony of how they found Yeshua.
So if you know Sid Roth?
Yes, Sid Roth, he's a converted Jew.
Ministry is
Yeah.
totally focused.
Yeah.
A lot of people need that visual thing
Yeah.
to believe.
Yeah.
And some
Maybe,
people
yeah.
don't need the visual thing.
What's the author? Kahn? Something Kahn. He wrote The Harbinger. He wrote a whole bunch of books. He's what's...
Rabbi,
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan. Thank you. Well done. Chocolate for you.
what's the name of that Jewish YouTube?
The YouTube channel is One for Israel. And if you just sit and play their videos, it'll be just one testimony after another testimony of Jewish people telling about how they found Jesus.
Yeah, I was
That's
at
bad.
No, I've listened to lots of those.
Yeah.
I heard this guy, what, Zimmerman? Is that what his first name was?
Jack Zimmerman.
Jack Zimmerman, he was speaking at a church last week. We got to talk to him afterwards. And he was talking about how his wife had found Christ, and how she was Jewish, and her mother basically said, don't let him mention Jesus. Don't let him read anything from the New Testament. And I guess he went up there and said, okay, I'm going to read you, from the Bible. She's like, no New Testament stuff. She's like, yeah. So he read Isaiah 53. She turned to him and went, I said nothing about Jesus. And he's like, I didn't say anything. I didn't read on the New Testament. This is Isaiah 53. In that moment, she went, okay, Christ is the Lord and Savior.
Wow. That is very cool.
I think it's actually reversed for him and his wife, but basically,
Yeah.
that's the story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it was.
Those are the best stories.
Yeah. That's
And
beautiful.
others too. Same way. Yeah.
They're in high confusion, though. The typical Western Jew is not, they're not Orthodox. The Orthodox Jews or they actually know their Bible. But the people that go to the synagogues now, it's a tradition, it's a culture, it's not a religion.
That's right. And some of them are even atheists. And they still go to synagogue.
In fact, half the Jews, they would report that about half the Jews in Israel are secular Jews.
Okay.
There's a lot of Jews that aren't religious too in Israel.
That's what he just said.
It is very, I just share this because I found it just so intriguing I went to the synagogue on the Sabbath in Jerusalem and was able to visit with some North American Jews, young people, who had gone back to live and work in Israel. And they'd been brought up in the Bronx or in New York, and that is one of the highest concentrations of Jews today, other than with measles. No, that's a joke. The Jews are having a lot of measles outbreaks right now because they don't believe in vaccination. And so,
I didn't know that.
A young lady just over 40 died of measles just in the last couple of days.
I didn't realize that was big in the Jewish community.
Yeah, and it's a hotbed in New York City. But
yeah,
that is one. Talking to these young people that were living back in Israel and asking them, why did you come back to Israel? I don't know, Neil. I just felt a calling to come back to Israel. And at that moment, you are standing there talking to someone who is part of the play.
Part of the what?
The play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of history, part of the prophecy. 1 million Russians immigrated to Israel after the Berlin Wall came down in 1989.
Yeah, that was a big deal. Yeah.
$1 million Russian Jews.
In 10 years. It was over a 10-year period. Phenomenal.
I think the Jews from the UK and France will start going in great numbers.
You think so?
I think they already are.
Yeah, there's already rumblings underneath, secret knowledge that they're passing around amongst each other that it's over here for us. It's done.
That it's what?
It's over for them in France and UK. They don't have a future there.
Okay.
That it is over for them. And a lot of Jews in America are beginning to wonder. And whether their future is in America or Israel. The only safe place for a Jew is Israel. And it's just going to get more and more.
Why would you want to be there when the revival takes place as a Jew of God's chosen people?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, that is now a thing. That would be
That's right.
That would be a wonderful time.
What will bring them there will be they will be driven there by persecution. They will go there, though. I think it's part of God's plan that the Jews, that most of them get back there. Because what he has in mind to do with them is quite remarkable. Because he's still going to use them to show to the world that he's God before he returns.
How many people live there? Is it 11 million?
It's about 7 million.
7.5
million. But 1.5 million are Palestinians or Arabs. So about 6.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
But of those, the ultra-Orthodox Jews are about 1 million.
Is that high? Wow, that's a really high number.
Group of people, right?
Whew.
These are people that refuse to work, that sit and read the Torah all day, that basically demand social welfare from the state, that come on the bus and push everybody to the back and say, no, the front seat is...
That's an interesting group. You're absolutely right.
I have
So when were you there last?
Yeah. Oh, 2013.
Okay. How many times have you gone?
Just the once.
Okay.
I have a lot of Hutterite friends. Mark, you could identify you. And It is absolutely striking, other than for the dreadlocks. You get the dreadlocks off, you have so many human features that are insane.
That is interesting.
And when I came back from that particular visit, I kept saying to my other friends, you have Jewish roots. And they could have.
Sure.
Because they were up in that Transylvania area, same time as the Mennonite Brethren.
Okay, yeah.
There's a lot of Jewish blood, I understand, in some of the Mennonite Brethren.
Is that
background.
a fact?
What is the beginning of that? Jewish roots.
Abraham is the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
I mean, I was
One of the guys that I worked
Noah
with,
wasn't Jewish.
his name is Paul.
Actually, here's the thing. The Jewish...
He's been raised, speaks German, his family's all in German, they actually moved here. He goes, yes, I am German, he said, but also Jewish, and nobody knows how. He said, but it traces it back. He said, there is
I
something.
mean, the Jews were scattered throughout that.
Oh, yeah, I guess.
Poland had a huge concentration, but a lot of that started in that Hungary, Austria, Hungary, Transylvania.
Yeah. So Paul had a question about where does Jewishness start, and was Noah a Jew? Well, the thing about Jews is their father Abraham was the first patriarch and the father of the nation, but they claim their ancestry back to Adam. Right? They will claim that the lineage it goes back to Adam because they claim Adam. They don't say he's Jewish, but they say that. Right, but they'll claim all of humanity back to there, but they'll trace their line back to the first man, but the first Jew, Abraham, right?
Yeah.
But they will sort of subsume that righteous line from Adam through Noah and all that. Those are their people, right?
You say Adam and Eve were very big people, very tough and strong. They weren't our size. They were 8 feet.
I doubt that.
Really?
I think that they were genetically very similar to us, and they would have looked, I think, Middle Eastern. They would have had black hair, brown eyes, and olive skin. That is it's kind of like that. From that genetic seed comes everything that we see now. Just kind of like the first dogs we know were probably wolves. And from 2 wolves come all dogs. And you get those things by removing certain genes, shutting certain genes off. But the full expression of the human genome, probably black hair, brown eyes, olive skin.
So you think Jewish was a race before it was a religion?
That's an interesting thing to ask. It was an ethnicity before it was a religion. Yeah, I mean Judaism. Abraham is called by God. The Jews are first called a nation at Mount Sinai. So there's a 400-year interim there. 500 years. There's about a 500-year gap between Abraham and Mount Sinai. So yeah, they're first called a nation, interestingly enough, on the 6th of Sivan on their calendar, which they celebrate as the giving of the law, and they call that feast the Feast of Pentecost. So they share a birthday with the church. As they were celebrating the birth of the nation of Israel, the church was born right at the temple. Right there. Crazy, huh? So the Jews and Christians have so much similarity. We share the same birthday. Everything. It's just.
If you talk to an Orthodox Jew, and oh man, there's a small bookstore in the old city that these two brothers have a passion. They love to have Christians and Jews understand each other better. So they try very hard to use a language, verbiage that is similar to Christians and Jews. But as I was talking to the one fellow one day and talking about the Messiah, he says, Neil, you have to understand. And he had just gone through a half hour of embracing that unity that he would love to see between the Christians and the Jews. But he said, you have to understand that I was born into the kingdom of God. I was born into the nation of God's chosen people. So to him, that is truly, in his mind, at that moment, that is his salvation. And the words he used, Neil, I was born, I was blood born into.
It's beautiful. That's just exactly the way Nicodemus would have thought of himself.
Yeah. But
Jesus would have
say that.
Isn't that crazy?
And I looked into his eyes, and you could just imagine the scales over his eyes. And I thought, how can this be? But he was just a very gentle person. He was a wonderful human being.
Yeah, that's amazing. But he's not probably following the Torah. He's not following what God told the Jews to do, whatever that is, right? Like there's certain things they have to do, besides and follow the law.
Well, he says he was an Orthodox. He's
He's an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah, he said he was Orthodox.
Oh, okay.
He's covenant of the law.
Yeah.
It's.
Should we wrap up that way people can go if they have to?
Yeah.
And then the rest of us can sit and talk about this till midnight?
Maybe I'll pray and then you guys, whoever needs to go can go. And really, you can go anytime, buddy. Willie always has an early morning. Well, Lord, thanks for bringing Ken out. And thanks for your incredible story that we get to hear again and again. And thanks for opening up some of the mysteries for us and showing us, giving us divine revelation on what's going on in terms of resurrection and the events surrounding that. I pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit is very active in us in the next week, and pray your blessing on the men that were here and the men that aren't here, and on Mr. Ken Wiebe. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Well, thanks, Ken.
Yeah, you're very welcome. This has been a passion of mine, and it's only grown more intense in the last 10 years. As I told the people who were here last time, I eventually was studying so much on my own, I decided I'm going to get a certificate from Biola University, so I applied to their university and I got a certificate in Christian apologetics because I was studying it so much. And it was at that time that I came in contact with an organization called Reasonable Faith, William Lane Craig. So I opened a chapter here in Saskatoon, and this is part of what I do. So,
what does that mean? You open a chapter. What does that mean to open a chapter?
That means that I have access to the resources of Reasonable Faith, which is an organization you can search for on the web. And that is the teaching ministry of William Lane Craig. And what he does is he makes his stuff available to chapter leaders all over the world. So I get updates from him regularly. His organization, I asked him for stuff. He sends me stuff. I've gotten some books through them that they've given, and I'm like, oh, this is good stuff. Of course, I mean, you'll read some of Bill Craig's stuff. You'll listen to some of his his videos maybe, and you'll go, I don't quite agree with him on everything. You never will agree with everyone on everything. These guys are doing their best to defend what I would call mere Christianity. That body of truth that characterizes all true Christians all over the world. And go ahead.
Are you on YouTube, Tom?
Not speaking, only as a dancer. Believe it or not, I'm on YouTube. You subscribe. How about this? I'll point you to some teachers who are better, who teach me, and you subscribe to them. Yeah?
Well, I do get a lot of comments from people. Positive too.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to subscribe to some really good teachers, I can give you some names.
I know Boyd's got his own channel, and his wife runs it.
Right.
Gives some people how to do it. It's not that difficult. It's students. You know how to do it too. I have my own channel. I don't website. People have subscribed to me just for my comments.
Right. So what I'll do is I'll just give you my personal email right now, or I'll just give you the email of my Reasonable Faith chapter. So it's Reasonable Faith Saskatoon @gmail.com. All one word. Reasonable Faith Saskatoon. If you send me an email, I will send you a resource pack, and you will come in contact with some real solid teachers.
Reasonable what again?
Reasonable Faith.
Faith?
Yeah. Reasonable Faith Saskatoon @gmail.com.
All small case.
All small case, no spaces.
I was kind of wondering, you were going back to your theories. You said that you met Christians have a difficult time accepting the resurrection.
Not Christians. I've not met.
Oh, okay.
I've met non-Christians who are kind of marginal. They appreciate Christianity, but they will go, "Boy, the resurrection, that's a toughie." Oof. Or educated people, they'll go, "Oh yeah, I'm very interested in the history of the first century, and I know all about the life of Jesus and all of these things." But the resurrection, and they'll always refer to one of the 6 that I gave you. They'll always go, "You know what? I really think it was this. I really think it was that. I really think it was that." And here's the funny thing: the way this works is you just go, "Well, there's a few facts that you need to account for, so I'm listening. Tell me how this worked." Burden of proof is on them. Watch them fail. And encourage them.
Give me an example of someone telling you right now that I believe in the swoon theory.
All right. So
you would say what?
I would say, you know what? Convince me. Make me a believer, because I'm suffering under the misconception that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And it has really affected my life. Set me free. Convince me of that. All you have to do is take into account a few simple facts. Take into account the fact that everyone knows he was crucified by the Romans, that he was placed in a tomb, the tomb was found empty, and that the disciples believed that he was risen from the dead. His brother converted, and Paul became the greatest missionary in history.
Before they open their mouth.
Right, and I just tell them,
Yeah.
Convince me, but I need you to account for these facts. And I put the burden of proof on them, and I go, if you can give me a plausible explanation for how this happened without the resurrection, I will join your club.
And then it shuts them right down.
Yeah, well, they fail instantly.